video is a little bit different than what I usually do. Instead of presenting a song, I'm going to talk about something that I built. I'm a fairly typical guitar player in that I'm always chasing the holy grail of perfect tone. You know, just the right sound, always chasing after it and not quite achieving it. One of the things that I did years and years ago was I saw an article for a tube distortion unit called the McTube, and so I built it because after all, it's tubes, it's got to sound great. And it sounded all right. I don't think I did the best job building it at the time, and it kind of fell by the wayside and I ended up not using it that much. Instead I bought, I think on my pedal board I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I have 7 various kinds of distortion type units, whether it's fuzz or overdrive or whatever. But I'm still not satisfied with it. And so I took my original McTube and I totally rebuilt it. And I made it stereo, so it has 2 channels on it, chasing after what tends to be called nowadays saturation rather than distortion that us guitar players work with. It's still a form of distortion. It's just, I think, supposed to be a little richer and more harmonically pleasing and do wonderful things to your music. So I want to talk about the McTube that I built, and I'm going to get a little detailed here. You heard a little bit of an example with my guitar playing. I'm going to give more examples with guitar, bass, and a synthesizer just to show what the McTube does. I'm also going to show you a little bit of the building process and the changes that I made to the original drawing. So here we go. We're going to go on a voyage of finding the perfect tone. This is a schematic diagram for the Real McTube, and please don't worry if you can't read a schematic diagram. That isn't what this is about. In fact, we'll make this a little bit simpler in that you can just ignore this whole part of it because that's just the power supply for it. Instead, we're going to focus on the bottom, and we're going to start right here. This is the input jack. This is where you'd plug in your guitar or bass or synthesizer or whatever. So just think of your standard floor pedal on the floor, sticking the jack of your guitar in the one end. And what happens is the signal comes in that jack and it goes into the first stage of, in this case, a 12AX7 tube. And a 12AX7 tube actually has 2 stages inside that little glass envelope. So this is the first stage right here. And what happens is that signal comes out of here, goes into the second stage, and it goes through this. And this is what would be called the drive or the gain control on your fuzz unit or your tube screamer. And what happens is that this first stage here, it amplifies the signal so much so that the second stage can't handle it and it starts to clip, it starts to distort. And the more you turn up that gain stage, the more that the second stage then distorts. What happens then is the signal comes out of here, through here, and out here. And this, of course, is the output jack on your unit. And this is what would be called usually the volume control. So you have a gain or a drive control and a volume control here, and it controls the overall volume of the output. And it works the same on any kind of distortion or fuzz unit. It could be tubes, it could be transistors, it could be op amps, it could be FETs. Whatever it is, they basically all work on this principle that you're driving the signal, you're amplifying the signal to the point of where it's clipping, it's distorting. the Real McTube Thermionic Overdrive. I want to offer some thoughts, conclusions, the good, the bad, the ugly about this unit. I think the first thing I should point out is while it's labeled Overdrive on the website, it's really more of a distortion unit. So what are some of the cons? I'll start there. Well, the first one was really obvious while I was working with it, and that's the controls are just way too sensitive. You barely get the volume off of 0 because it just has so much gain in it. The second one I think is maybe more of a matter of opinion. I find the distortion, especially when you start to crank it, a little harsh and fuzzy. Now, some people love that. They think it's a great sound. Myself, I prefer something a little creamier and less harsh. The final con, I'd say, is more my problem, is the self-oscillation you could hear. That's because this is a really cheap Chinese tube. This is a good tube in here, but I cheaped out and I shouldn't have, and I'm paying the price for that. Pros, well, I use it mainly for low-level saturation. I barely have it on, and I just have it so it just adds a little bit on the top end, and I really like that sound. It sounds very good with just a little bit of saturation. I think it sounds great on bass and synth. I know it was built for guitar, but I think it sounds great on the bass and synth. It's also very clean, and it offers very little coloration. It's a pretty transparent unit. Tube sound. Does it have the tube sound? I suppose it does. The signal runs through 2 tubes, so it must have the tube sound, but I'm not sure that I hear it. I certainly get a lot of compression when I crank it up, and maybe it has the tube sound. I'd really like to know your opinion. Could you hear the tube sound when I turned it on and off? I'd like to know. Modifications. Well, there's a couple. The person who designed this really wanted it to really drive hard, and so he changed the resistors for the biasing of the tubes to something quite different than what the manufacturer recommends. And people who built it that way, and the first version of this, I built it that way, it really was a tone sucker. It really affected the tone. So I went with what is specified by the manufacturer for the bias resistors, and I found that it really sounds much, much better that way. The other thing that I wonder if I did, these are 500K pots, and I'm wondering if 1 mega ohm pots would actually allow a little bit more leeway when you're turning it, so it isn't like virtually off, but you can actually turn it a little bit to get a change. That would be a modification I think I would make, or at least try out. Anyways, so this is the Real McTube. I hope you enjoyed the demo. I'd love to hear your comments and opinions about it. And as always, like, subscribe to my channel. Thank you.